dark where the brood has grown. Water thick where the city's rot, shadows coil in a stagnant blot, eyes unblinking, teeth that tear, the brood is waiting in the lair. First strike lands, the guard is thrown, dragged away, his screams are gone. Bonesnapper, lurking deep in the tunnels where shadows creep. Bonesnapper, jaws of dread, none return, all are dead. Spears thrust wild through the choking mist, blood runs black where the stones are slick, armor splits, the screams ignite, one by one they fall tonight. Claws that hook, the jaws that grind, echoes shatter the guard's last line. Bonesnapper, lurking deep in the tunnels where shadows creep. Bonesnapper, jaws of dread, none return, all are dead. Lanterns fall, the light is drowned, sewer walls shake with grinding sound, dripping teeth in the black they wait, Calimshan's night has sealed their fate. Final stand in the choking rain, a dying curse, the guards refrain, the brood descends, the body's torn, no more patrols will greet the dawn. Lurking deep in the tunnels where shadows creep. Bonesnapper, jaws of dread, none return, all are dead. Lantern smoke in the Calim night, sewer stones drown in endless blight. Night guard march through stinking stone, never return from beneath their home.
The Bonesnapper is one of those creatures that sits in the strange twilight zone between classic monster and forgotten oddity, a relic of early game design that managed to lodge itself into the memory of anyone unlucky enough to cross paths with it in a dungeon corridor or a jungle clearing. Unlike dragons or demons, it has no sprawling mythology or endless entries across every edition. But what it does have is a physical presence that is brutally memorable, a style of predation that leaves scars on both flesh and imagination, and a name that delivers exactly what it promises. You hear the word Bonesnapper, and you know exactly what it does to you if it gets close enough. That kind of truth in advertising is rare, and it has allowed the beast to linger, lurking on the edges of bestiaries, cropping up occasionally in modern conversions, and always waiting to be rediscovered by a referee looking for something that feels both old school and viciously tactile. The physical form of the Bonesnapper is immediately striking. It's man-sized, but far more compact and powerfully muscled. It resembles some crude caricature of a dinosaur or monitor lizard, with its squat body, thick tail and overdeveloped jaws. It's not sleek, it's not elegant, it's certainly not graceful. It looks like it was put together for one job: rushing forward in a burst of sudden speed, slamming into you with low-slung momentum and then clamping down with jaws designed not merely to pierce, but destroy. Those jaws are the signature. When a Bonesnapper bites, it doesn't just cut or puncture, it crushes. Bones break with wet, splintering sound, and the creature revels in that act. Some accounts go so far as to describe it as sadistic, though that's perhaps just a projection of human horror at its feeding habits. Once it has you, The beast thrashes you from side to side, bones cracking in its maw, and the remnants of that meal will be left in a heap of splintered fragments. Unlike most predators, which leave recognizable gnawed skeletons, the Bonesnapper leaves behind a debris field of shards and chips, as if it had been feeding with a mortar and pestle. The tail is the other notable weapon, thick and muscular, capable of sweeping an opponent's legs from under them or battering a ribcage with a single well-timed strike. Between these two implements, the beast can handle prey much larger than itself. Stories abound of adventurers in plate armor being bowled over by a tail swipe and then subjected to the crushing jaws before they could regain their footing. The claws are less remarkable, more suited to traction and digging than offensive use, though in a frenzy the creature will rake with them as any reptilian predator might. In its natural habitat, which early sources place firmly in tropical or subtropical jungles, the Bonesnapper is an ambush hunter. It lurks in undergrowth, dense thickets, or along game paths, lying in wait with a patience that belies its brutish appearance. When prey comes near, it lunges in a low, short sprint, clamps down, and relies on sheer muscle power to overpower its target. It does not stalk over long distances. It does not chase in open pursuit. Its physiology isn't built for endurance. Instead, it's an opportunist, striking when the terrain favors it and withdrawing if the ambush fails. That said, once it has latched on, it is terrifyingly persistent. Stories tell of Bonesnappers hanging onto prey even as they are stabbed and battered, refusing to let go until the victim is lifeless or it's reduced to pulp. Carrion is not beyond them, particularly when lean times force it, but Bonesnappers much prefer fresh kills. They're known to feed communally at times, with multiple individuals converging on a carcass, and in these frenzied group feedings they display a sort of crude pack dynamic, though they're not social creatures by nature. During the mating season or while rearing broodlings, they can operate in small groups with a frightening degree of cooperation. One may flush prey while the other waits in ambush, and once a victim is brought down, they will all share in the kill. This makes stumbling upon a lair doubly dangerous. Not only do you have to contend with the adults, but the broodlings as well. Small but numerous, they'll swarm at ankles and tendons, worrying a target until the larger ones can move in. One of the most unnerving behaviours attributed to the Bonesnapper is its tendency to collect the remains of its kills, particularly jawbones. Early dungeon accounts make note of lairs strewn with these grisly trophies, as though the creatures had a fetish for the parts of prey that echo their own most terrifying weapon. Whether this is instinct or display behaviour or simply a side effect of their feeding method is unclear, but the image is a powerful one. Crawl into the wrong cave or descend into the wrong sewer tunnel, and the crunch of bone underfoot warns you that something here has been killing for a long time. Later sources leaned into this idea, presenting Bonesnapper lairs as horror show galleries of broken jaws, a natural warning sign for any who would know what they're looking at. Their intelligence is minimal. They are not tool users, nor do they display problem solving beyond what one might expect from a crocodile or a large constrictor snake. And yet, within that narrow bandwidth of cunning, they are brutally effective. They know how to wait, how to strike when prey is vulnerable, and how to use terrain to their advantage. They're not easily bluffed or distracted once committed, though bright light or fire can sometimes drive them back. Pathfinder's interpretation labelled them as magical beasts, but I'm inclined to think of them more as natural predators, albeit a few monstrous quirks exaggerated for dramatic effect. There's no need to involve sorcery to explain them when nature, read in tooth and claw, suffices. Though it can be fun to say that this is a good model for what the original proto-dragons might have been like. Now, transplant these creatures into Kalimshan, part of the Forgotten Realms. The things take on a very different tone. The jungles of Cholt or Chondlewood might be their classic environment, but Kalimshan is no stranger to exotic beasts brought in through the markets of Kalimport. Nobles and pashas might delight in displaying dangerous creatures as status symbols. Merchants traffic in rare animals or menageries and gladiatorial pits, and smugglers are only too happy to make coin selling predators that should never see the inside of a city. All it takes is one careless shipment, one overturned cage, and suddenly you have a pair of Bonesnappers loose in the sewers, adapting all too well to their new hunting grounds. In such an environment, the ambush style translates perfectly. Sewer tunnels provide cover, darkness, and choke points ideal for their rush and bite tactics. Their echoing corridors amplify the terror of their attacks, with bone-snapping sounds carrying far through the dripping dark. Their lairs, tucked into collapsed tunnels or disused cisterns, quickly fill with the detritus of their kills, warning signs ignored by those who dismiss them as just another symptom of Kellenport's underbelly. At first, they prey on strays, cats, dogs, perhaps the odd goat or donkey. Then, as the brood hatches and the hunger grows, they escalate. Children vanish. Apprentices vanish. The poor who sleep too near the sewer grates vanish. Panic spreads in whispers, and the watch is slow to act, for the poor are not their priority. But the Thieves' Guild notices. The were-rats of Kellenport use those same tunnels for smuggling, and they do not take kindly to predators disrupting their routes. Their attempts to cull the beasts end in blood, and in the process they stir things best left sleeping. A sealed alcove has burst open, a long-dead mage rises in bandaged wrath, and the tremors of the fighting rouse the ancient clockwork tunneler whose gnashing gears threaten to dig straight into the vault of a powerful Viking family. All of this spirals out from the presence of two reptiles that simply wanted to eat and breed, proof that even the most straightforward monster can serve as a fulcrum for an entire urban adventure. That, to me, is the essence of the Bonesnapper. It's not just some world-ending horror, nor is it a noble beast of legend. It is a raw animal violence given form, a hazard that becomes a story engine precisely because of how messy its presence is. Put one in the right place, and the ripples it sends out will keep a whole table busy for many sessions. If the Bonesnapper is frightening as a lone hunter, it becomes a nightmare when you begin to consider its breeding cycle. Most predatory reptiles in the natural world lay their eggs and then abandon them, leaving the next generation to fend for themselves. The Bonesnapper breaks that pattern, and it is this one deviation that makes them far more dangerous in the long term. Females dig out burrows or take over hollow spaces as nest sites. The clutch is kept well guarded until hatching. Even more alarming, Bonesnapper parents, male and female alike, will remain in the area for weeks after the brood emerges, watching over their offspring as they begin the grisly process of learning to hunt. And in that phase, the tunnels or clearings near a nest are positively lethal, because you're not dealing with one ambush predator, you're dealing with half a dozen juveniles and 2 adults, all keyed up with protective instincts. The adults are relentless, hurling themselves into combat with a ferocity that shocks even seasoned adventurers, while the broodlings swarmed like oversized monitor lizards, darting for exposed ankles or leaping at faces with needle-sharp little jaws. Rage drakes, I'm thinking of those. Brood ecology is the cornerstone of the Bonesnapper's success. A single female may lay between half a dozen and a dozen eggs, and though not all survive, enough do that in good conditions a population can establish itself rapidly. Within a few months, the young are already large enough to take down smaller prey, and by the end of the first year, they're nearly indistinguishable from adults. It's this rapid growth, coupled with their communal feeding, that gives rise to the horrific reports of Bonesnapper infestations. Situations where an entire clutch matures in the wrong environment and begins feeding en masse. In jungles, this is terrifying but manageable. Predators and diseases take their toll, and eventually numbers stabilize. In the artificial ecosystem of a city sewer, however, all the checks are absent. Rats, stray dogs, and waste provide a constant food supply. There are no natural predators large enough to cull them. In such conditions, Bonesnappers become a rolling plague of reptilian jaws, and by the time the local authorities realize the scope of the problem, it's often too late to stop them without committing entire patrols of soldiers. This ties directly into urban folklore that surrounds them. In Kellenport, Bonesnappers are spoken of in hushed tones by those who have lost friends or family in the labyrinth of the Undercity. The name itself becomes a shorthand for the unknown predator, the bogeyman of the drains. Parents warn children not to stray near sewer grates, saying the Bonesnapper waits for you. Labourers joke grimly that the cracking of wood beams in old buildings is just a Bonesnapper gnawing through the timbers. And among the thieves' guilds, the mere rumour of Bonesnapper activity is enough to make seasoned cut purses reroute their smuggling runs. The horror is amplified because few surface dwellers ever see the creatures clearly. They hear the snap of jaws, the scream of prey cut short, and the splash of water as something drags the body away. In the dark imagination of the common folk, the Bonesnapper grows to mythical size, a dragon of the sewers, when in reality it's a man-sized lizard with a mean bite. But myths do not require accuracy, they require impact, and on that front the Bonesnapper more than delivers. Now, set this beast against other denizens of the underworld and you begin to see how it shapes the ecosystem. Kobolds, for instance, have a complicated relationship with Bonesnappers. On the one hand, kobolds are no strangers to harnessing dangerous reptiles. They've been known to domesticate fire lizards, drakes, even wyverns. Or wyverns, if they can. The Bonesnapper with its ferocity and bone-crushing jaws seems a natural candidate for such treatment, yet the kobold's small stature makes them particularly vulnerable to Bonesnapper attacks. A single misplaced step near a lair can result in half a tribe being wiped out overnight. Some kobold clans speak of Bonesnappers in the same way they do dragons, with wary respect and mythic dread. The beast might become a test, a foe that only the strongest of their number may hunt and survive. In rare cases, kobolds have managed to capture young Bonesnappers and raise them as guardians, mostly setting them loose in tunnels rigged with traps, creating gauntlets of horror for intruders. But such cases are the exception, not the rule, and more often than not, kobolds' attempts to control end with shrieks in the dark and the gnashing of jaws. The were-rats of Kellenport, by contrast, loathe Bonesnappers with a burning passion. To them, the sewers are sacred territory, the arteries of their criminal empire, and the intrusion of a predator that targets them, the same food supply even, rats, strays, and the occasional helpless humanoid, is intolerable. Were-rats fight dirty, but Bonesnappers fight brutally, and in the cramped tunnels of the Undercity, the advantage is not always with the lycanthropes. There are whispered stories of whole were-rat gangs being eradicated by a single clutch of Bonesnappers. The survivors spin legends of the Maw and the tunnels, a beast that even Silver cannot stop, a rival alpha predator that refuses to be tamed. In response, the were-rats have been known to post bounties on Bonesnapper hides, drawing adventurers into the fight, and in some dark corners they have even formed uneasy pacts with necromancers or alchemists to poison the brood. This interplay of predator and predator turns the Undercity into a contested landscape, where the Bonesnappers are both hazard and a narrative catalyst for change. The longer Bonesnappers remain in one place, the more they warp the ecosystem around them. Game trails in the jungle bend away from their lairs, leaving eerie patches of silence in the forest where even birds dare not go. In the city, dogs and cats vanish from entire districts, creating knock-on effects as vermin populations explode, unchecked, until the Bonesnappers turn their attention to human prey. Their lairs, marked by heaps of splintered bone and gnawed jawbones, become cursed places in the minds of locals, avoiding them even when hunger or desperation might drive someone to seek shelter there. Adventurers who stumble across one of these sites often feel a chill of recognition, for the signs are unmistakable. The awareness that you are already within a predator's hunting ground is one of the most unsettling feelings a dungeon crawl can deliver. Even the wider magical community has its own take on these predators. Wizards, always eager to study or exploit, note the sheer brutal crushing force of the jaws and speculate on alchemical uses for the musculature. There are scrolls suggesting that the Bonesnapper ligaments, properly rendered, can be used in potions of strength, or that their jawbones make for unusually resonant focuses in necromantic rituals involving bone. None of this is widely verified, of course, and much of it has the whiff of charlatanry about it, but the fact that such ideas circulate at all shows how firmly the creature has sunk its teeth into the shared imagination of the realms. Clerics of deities associated with death or destruction have, in some cases, even taken the Bonesnapper as a totemic beast, an animal whose rare violence mirrors the shattering of the mortal form. Of course, worshippers of Malar are well known to use Bonesnappers and trade them on the regular. And here lies one of the overlooked truths about the Bonesnapper. It's not just a monster, it's a story seed. Place one in a dungeon and you have an immediate hazard, a fight where players will remember the sheer brutality of its mechanics. Place one in a jungle and you have a persistent threat, a lurking shadow that keeps the party on edge every time they hear a branch snap. Place one in a city and suddenly you have folklore, guild rivalries, civic panic, and urban legends spiraling out from a single clutch of reptilian predators. And it is a reminder that not every monster needs a sprawling mythos or a cosmic agenda. Sometimes all you need is a creature with jaws strong enough to turn femurs into powder and an instinct to strike from the dark, and the rest of the story will write itself around that point of terror. Bonesnappers do not limit themselves to one kind of environment, though. Across Faerun, they appear they're largely tied to the conditions that suit their ambush hunting style. So they need dense undergrowth, rocky canyons, and occasionally human-altered landscapes where prey is abundant and cover is plentiful. In the jungles of Cholt or the rainforests of Mazdaca, they will hunt as you would expect a predator to, slipping along game trails, riverbanks, lungs filling with the scent of prey. But when you transplant them to an urban or semi-urban environment, the narrative shifts. A Bonesnapper in the rubble-strewn alleys of Kalimshan behaves differently, learning quickly where the smell of fresh blood or cooking meat emanates, and how to use the debris, sewer pipes, and staircases as natural ambush points. These predators are adaptive in their limited intelligence sort of way. They will learn to avoid traps or pursue prey in patterns that make them seem more cunning than they actually are. Variants, while not numerous, do exist. Pathfinder mentions magical influences that may occasionally result in slightly larger specimens or ones with minor magical resistance, but in most lore, size and strength vary naturally, reflecting diet, terrain, and competition. Urban Bonesnappers are often leaner, more wiry, honed by chasing rats and evading city patrols, while the jungle cousins bulk up on ungulates and even the occasional humanoid wandering into their wrong clearing. There are unconfirmed tales of alpha Bonesnappers in sewers, individuals that reach enormous size due to the absence of predators and the abundance of food. These beasts become local legends, creeping into adventure journals and travelogues, a whispered warning to outsiders who think that they understand Kalimshan's underworld. When designing encounters, the flexibility of these beasts is part of their charm. A DM can seed them into almost any environment with believable logic. A jungle patrol stumbles across clawed tracks and shattered bones. A dungeon crew notices piles of crushed skeletal remains in a corridor that they hoped would be empty. In Kalimshan, the merchant's shipment goes awry, and suddenly there are 2 adult Bonesnappers plus a brood in the sewers, turning the Undercity into a living trap. And it doesn't stop there. Each of these scenarios has the potential to ripple outward, affecting other factions and NPCs. Kobold might attempt to exploit the beast for guardianship, where rats may retreat or interfere violently. Even mundane humans, from street urchins to noble families, can be drawn into the narrative through fear, greed, or just accident. The Bonesnapper acts as an organic catalyst, a biological force that drives story rather than waiting passively for it to happen. In terms of campaign integration, Bonesnappers are particularly useful for DMs who want encounters to feel alive. Unlike undead constructs or planar invaders, Bonesnappers are motivated by clear animalistic drives: hunger, reproduction, and territory. This makes their behavior predictable enough to plan for, but unpredictable enough to in execution that adventurers simply can't brute force their way through a scenario. They could, but they're in for a scrap. These layers often have layered complications. In the Kalimshan sewer network, for instance, adventurers find themselves not only contending with their adults and their brood, but also with the resident hazards of city life: unstable masonry, flooding, human waste. Add to that the presence of a disrupted mummy in a sealed alcove and a mechanical tunneling construct inadvertently activated by the chaos, and you have a dynamic environment that demands both strategy and improvisation on the spot. Combat's not just between player characters and monsters, it's an interplay between multiple factions and environmental risks, all creating and reacting to the Bonesnapper's own natural instincts. The broodlings themselves add another layer of tactical tension. While individually small and weak, they operate in packs, swarming anything that moves. This is particularly effective against low-level characters or NPCs who might find themselves grappling with multiple threats at once. Even one adult Bonesnapper in a lair is lethal. Add in a brood of 3 to 6 juveniles and the encounter becomes a chaotic ballet of snapping jaws, tails smashing through obstacles, and environmental hazards suddenly coming into play. The juvenile's presence also encourages adventurers to think about crowd control, positioning, and movement in a way that a single monster rarely does. And because Bonesnappers are instinct-driven, they will abandon combat if severely injured or distracted, introducing the possibility of a chase or a sudden environmental shift. A flooding tunnel, a collapsing wall, or an inadvertent detonation of an alchemical residue left behind by a merchant guild or a sorcerer or something. Cultural texture in Kalimshan further complicates encounters. Festivals, markets, and street spectacles can bleed into Bonesnapper territory at any time. Imagine a tunnel under a spice bazaar suddenly filling with the smell of saffron and cumin, masking the scent of a fresh kill, or a sudden street parade causing vibrations and noise above, prompting a brood to scatter unpredictably. Escaped slaves, street urchins, or stray animals may appear mid-combat, either as victims, distractions, or unintentional allies. A noble's prized falcon might fly into the fray, adding a chaotic aerial threat to the players that can either protect them or, well, it could be lost. Even weather events like sudden desert storms or monsoon rains can partially flood tunnels, altering movement, obscuring vision, and forcing players to adapt. The Bonesnappers don't care about any of this, of course. They react purely to the immediate stimuli of prey and threat. But the dynamic environment makes for a storytelling opportunity that elevates a standard monster encounter into a multi-layered experience. Adventurers who stumble into Bonesnapper territory quickly realize that there's more to these creatures than raw power. They are living, breathing environmental hazards, a predator whose presence alters the behavior of every other creature in the area. They're a litmus test for party coordination, tactical creativity, and risk assessment. A party may enter a sewer believing themselves in control, only to discover that the adult Bonesnappers, their brood, the were-rat skirmish, a restless mummy, and a mechanical tunneler all interact in ways that are unpredictable and lethal. The Bonesnappers themselves are the anchor, but the surrounding ecology and urban culture are what make the encounter truly memorable. And of course, near-death experiences. Their impact on urban ecosystems can't be overstated. In districts where Bonesnappers establish a lair, local populations adapt. Some animals disappear, scavengers proliferate, and humans avoid certain alleys and tunnels. Merchant guilds take note, sometimes hiring adventurers as exterminators, while criminal organisations might attempt to manipulate or contain the beasts for their own ends. The Bonesnappers themselves remain entirely oblivious to the politics or commerce around them. They are predators, and everything else is simply part of their environment. This makes them a rare creature in the annals of role-playing. They are once fully self-contained and yet capable of generating sprawling narrative consequences, simply by existing. Finally, the Bonesnapper's reputation persists not just because of mechanics or lore, because it's a storytelling tool. DMs can use it to instill dread, to create unpredictable tension, or to encourage creative problem-solving. Its presence in a jungle or dungeon or beneath the city street carries narrative weight, and players intuitively recognize the danger even before they fully understand it. Its appeal is particularly aesthetic, partly mechanical, partly psychological. The notion of a creature whose primary weapon is a jaw designed to shatter bone taps into elemental fear that resonates regardless of addition or rule system. And don't forget, these creatures predate velociraptors popping into the popular mindset of all the modern people who've played the game. These are older than Jurassic Park. The sewers of Kellenport are not merely tunnels for drainage. They're a living network of history, commerce, crime, and neglect. Beneath the bustling markets, glittering palaces, and dusty streets, the stone arteries of the city pulse with water, waste, and the faint echo of distant footsteps. It is here, in this underworld, that is half-engineered chaos and half-natural rot, that the Bonesnappers found a new home. Two adults, young but already deadly, slipped from a crate in the animal markets above and moved swiftly, instinctively, to the quiet side tunnels where the smell of discarded meat and small animals promised easy meals. Their presence went unnoticed at first, scavenging strays, gnawing through the remains of butchered livestock, and avoiding human patrols with the careful timing of creatures honed for ambush. Then, as is inevitable for a predator species, the adults begin breeding. Their nest, tucked into a collapsed chamber behind the network of pipes, becomes the centre for a small brood. 3 to 6 juveniles emerged, wiry, hungry, surprisingly agile. Unlike their parents who rely on sheer power, the young Bonesnappers hunt with reckless coordination, swarming anything that moves, their needle-like teeth snapping at toes and hands alike. The perfect complement to the parents' ambush style, harrying and distracting prey until the adults can move in and finish off the hunt. But the arrival of these predators did not occur in isolation. The local were-rat thieves guild, which has long used the sewers as smuggling routes and clandestine hideouts, quickly realized their operations were compromised. Patrols encountered mangled bodies and vanished caches. Routes once considered secure became perilous as the Bonesnappers claimed new hunting grounds, and the rats, normally the guild's foot soldiers, began disappearing with alarming regularity. The were-rats responded with a mixture of fury and desperation. sending scouting parties to deal with the intruders and laying traps that were either ignored or destroyed outright by the predators. The tensions in the tunnels was palpable, the scent of blood mixing with the rotten steam rising from the grates above. Even that was not all. The disturbances in the tunnels shook the resting place of a long-dead Kalashite mage, sealed for centuries in a small alcove that had gone unnoticed beneath the old market district. The mummy, bound by both magic and oath, stirred with annoyance at the vibration and the clamour, its ancient consciousness already very irritable, and now actively hostile. Any party entering this warren will find themselves potentially dealing with a predator that hunts with tooth and tail, and a brood that rushes en masse, and scurrying and plotting of intelligent were-rats, and the supernatural adversary whose anger is as much about intrusion as it is about the disrespect of its long centuries' rest. Worse still, the tunnel contained relics of the city's ambitious, inventive past. Among them, a clockwork tunneling construct buried for decades after a failed heist that sought to burrow straight into a merchant's bank vault. Vibrations from the fight above, combined with the thrashing of Bonesnappers and collapsing masonry, risk awakening this automaton. Once active, it moves methodically, unable to distinguish between threat or innocent bystander. Its drills and gears can compromise walls, flood chambers, and if it reaches its original target, breach a vault containing treasures, documents, or arcane artifacts of considerable value. The adventurer's challenge is no longer simple survival. It is the navigation of a dynamic battlefield in which every action may trigger secondary consequences, cascading hazards, and competing agendas. The Bonesnappers themselves are both the spark and the anchor. Adult predators, formidable in their own right, have jaws that can shatter bone in seconds and tails capable of throwing humans off balance or crushing ribs. Broodlings harry, bite, and swarm, and while individually less dangerous, they multiply the threat, creating a living wall of teeth and claws. This ecosystem of predator, prey, and opportunist is chaotic, fast-moving, and terrifying. One round a party may be dealing with the adults, the next the juveniles leaping from shadows, and the next with environmental hazards. Water surging from a broken cistern, rubble falling from above, or even sacks of spices tumbling down from the tunnels from a bazaar overhead, clouding vision and choking lungs. The Kalimshan sewers are also alive with chance occurrences that may make the encounter unpredictable. Some runaway sand rats, part of a merchant's failed transport, may stampede through the tunnels, trampling the unwary and providing an unexpected cover for predators or victims. Guild skirmishes between rival were-rat factions may erupt mid-combat, allies turning against one another or switching sides depending on circumstances. Escaped slaves or street urchins may stumble into the fray, screaming warnings or attempting desperate rescues. Even a lost noble falcon, a prized hunting bird released from above, can add a flitting aerial threat that the encounter party must consider. These events ensure that the encounter is not just a simple matter of killing monsters, but navigating a living, reactive environment. Occasionally, just roll randomly in the book and add it into an encounter. Their features amplify the danger. Floors and walls are littered with jawbones, remnants of their adults' past kills, which provide both a warning and a hazard. A misstep can trigger a noise that alerts the brood or the adults, giving them a surprise advantage. Certain tunnels are prone to flooding, particularly after rainfall or through broken cisterns. I mean, it is a sewer after all, forcing dexterous movement or risking being swept into a deeper, more treacherous chamber. Secret passages and smuggling routes used by the were-rats complicate movement, offering opportunities for escape, ambush, or tactical repositioning for anyone who knows where to look. The mummy's sealed alcove can be disturbed if the parties dig through bone piles or collapsed barriers, introducing a supernatural element to an already lethal scene, and the clockwork tunnel is activated. The battlefield itself becomes dynamic and shifting, with collapsing walls, piercing drills, and sudden debris forcing constant adaptation. Scaling such an encounter for a party is about layering threat rather than inflating numbers. Low-level adventurers contend with a single adult and brood, with environment hazards providing additional tension. Mid-level groups face two adults, a brood, and the interference from were-rat factions, while higher-level parties contend with the full tapestry: two adults, brood, multiple were-rats, an awakened mummy, and a clockwork construct threatening the tunnel's integrity and their own strategic options. The result is not merely combat, but a narrative engine, with every round offering tactical and storytelling opportunities. Give the players moments to shine. Decisions are not just about survival, they're about choosing who lives, who dies, in which elements of the environment or factional interplay are manipulated to their advantage. Random events specific to Calamsham amplify the chaos. A flood surge may suddenly fill a chamber with waist-high water, slowing movement, providing cover and reducing hazards for ranged attacks. Spice markets above can spill their cargo, filling tunnels with choking dust that blinds or hampers players, maybe even narcotics. Runaway animals or carts introduce impromptu collisions or environmental damage. Factions may interfere mid-combat, either aiding or hindering players. Scented distillates from perfumes can make surfaces slick or ignite, creating local fire hazards. The city itself may tremble. A minor earthquake or a structural settle can topple masonry, altering the battlefield mid-encounter. These events are neither predictable nor static, and they ensure that each foray into the sewer is unique. It should be dynamic. In this living, breathing underworld, Bonesnappers are more than monsters. They're catalysts. They move according to instinct, breed according to biology, and yet their mere existence triggers conflicts, alliances, disasters, and heroism. Players not just fighting a creature, they negotiate a chaotic system, responding to natural predation, human and non-human factions, magical remnants, and mechanical hazards. The challenge is holistic, the terror tangible, and the story generated organically from the ecology of the Bonesnappers themselves and whatever the player's crazy decisions are. Settle back and imagine the scene. The damp air, the smell of rotten blood, the echoing crack of bone, the swirl of juvenile teeth darting at your ankles, the adults leaping from shadowed tunnels, water surging around your boots, were-rats screeching as they're driven off or caught in the fray, the mummy's bandaged form emerging from its alcove, and in the distance the unmistakable grinding of a clockwork tunneler beginning its destructive path towards a vault. It's a chaotic, layered, and dynamic encounter that exemplifies why the Bonesnapper, a monster that might have seemed minor in early sourcebooks, is capable of dominating both the narrative and the battlefield if handled with imagination. In short, the Bonesnapper is the kind of creature that rewards careful planning, improvisation, and a willingness to let the world around the adventurers react organically. It is terrifying not just because it bites, not just because it crushes, but because it alters everything it touches. The ecosystem, the factions, the story, the player's own perceptions of threat. In Calamsham, this effect is magnified 1,000-fold, turning a pair of escaped reptiles into the heart of a sprawling, multi-layered adventure. A living example of ecology, instinct, and chaos interwoven with human greed, magic, and mechanical ingenuity. The sewers are alive, and the Bonesnappers are very much in charge. Now, in consideration of that, Bonesnappers are more than just stat blocks on a page. They are tools for storytelling, and as such, they reward preparation as much as improvisation. The first thing a DM should consider is the environment. Bonesnappers thrive in spaces where cover, ambush points, and multiple levels exist. Whether it's the twisting, waterlogged tunnels of Calamsham or the dense underbrush of a jungle in Chult, think in 3 dimensions. I know it's hard to do this when you're drawing on a page. Shadows, rubble, overturned crates, hanging vines, half-collapsed stairways all give the predator tactical advantages. It is important to describe these features vividly to the players so they can visualize the threat and feel the tension of moving through spaces that the Bonesnappers know intimately. This is their hunting ground. Next, consider the behavioral ecology of the species. Adult Bonesnappers are intelligent enough to hunt effectively, but not enough to plot complex schemes. They respond to stimuli, movement, sound, scent. Broodlings act in packs, harassing prey and creating chaos. Use this instinctual behavior to create a dynamic encounter. Adults will often hang back, letting juveniles harry a party before striking with crushing force. That's what their instincts tell them to do. A wise party will notice these patterns. The adults waiting in shadowed alcoves, the broodlings moving in coordinated arcs. They choose tactics that exploit the monster's limitations. For example, sound distracting spells, sudden changes in lighting, or environmental obstacles can manipulate their ambush patterns, rewarding player creativity. Create an illusion of a boulder that the creature can hide behind as a form of cover. The illusion has no substance, you can fire straight through it. Smart thinking, people. Reward player creativity. Factions within the Bonesnapper territory add another layer of narrative tension. In urban settings like Calamsham, were-rats, smugglers, guilds, or even rival criminal enterprises may appear, drawing by the disruption or seeking to manipulate the chaos to their own ends. In wilderness settings, rival predators or territorial humanoids may inadvertently interfere with the encounter. These factions are not just window dressing, they provide opportunities for social interaction, negotiation, and improvisational roleplay. Networking. The Bonesnapper's presence can catalyze conflicts between groups, form alliances, or even provide clever players with leverage in negotiation. Oh yeah, we've fought Bonesnappers before, here's a skull of one. It's a classic example of a monster that is simultaneously a combat threat, a story driver, and a tool for world building. They all are, really. Scaling encounters is also critical. For low-level parties, a single adult with a brood provides a tense but manageable challenge. There's not too much going on. Include environmental hazards to make the fight dynamic, such as partially flooded chambers, loose rubble, or precarious catwalks. Mid-level groups can handle multiple adults and juveniles, but adding secondary threats like territorial were-rats or magic traps left behind by a long-dead mage elevates the stakes. High-level adventurers can be presented with a full tapestry. Multiple adults, brood, aggressive factions, disturbed mummy, environmental hazards like flooding or a mechanical tunneler, forcing them to think in terms of both tactical combat and strategic problem solving, long-term plans, that sort of thing. Each layer adds narrative richness, more choices, without simply inflating hit points or damage output. Encounters should be paced with care. Bonesnappers are fast and lethal, but they don't need to be on the battlefield constantly. Introduce suspense with sounds, wet scraping from the shadows, a distant snapping of bone, a sudden splash as broodlings rush into a tunnel. Let the player's senses work against them, building tension before the first bite is taken. Surprise, distraction, and partial information are key. Players may see shadowy movement and hear growls, but the exact threat is unknown, forcing them to adapt. When combat finally begins, the environment itself should change, flooding water, falling rubble, and surprising arrivals. Juvenile packs or factional interference. Ensure that the encounter is fluid and reactive. Finally, consider the storytelling payoff. Bonesnappers are not just a mechanical challenge, they're an ecological and narrative element. Their lair, hunting patterns, and effects on local factions tell a story about the world. Observing a bonesnapper feeding on a scavenged carcass conveys a visceral sense of a creature's brutality. Discovering a pile of jawbones neatly arranged on a shelf or embedded into a wall conveys intelligence and habit. Psychotic sort of behavior. Witnessing the effects of their intrusion, were-rats forced out of secret passages or mummy disturbed or mechanical construct roused, communicates that the world's alive, that actions have consequences. This transforms an encounter from a mere fight into a multi-layered narrative experience, one in which players must consider ecology, culture, and the interplay of multiple threats, not just monster statistics. Random events can also help maintain pace and narrative interest. A sudden cistern breach floods a channel, forcing movement choices and creating hazards. What if it's not filled with water? A spice spill from above chokes the air and obscures vision. Could be fungus, spores. Rival factions stumble in, either causing additional complications or opening opportunities for clever players to manipulate them. Could be a gang of assassins moving through the sewers. Lost animals, runaway carts, and the environmental collapses all keep the scene alive and prevent a static monster versus party setup. Using these tools, the DM can ensure that every Bonesnapper encounter is unique, challenging, and memorable. There you go, folks. That's about all I have for you on the Bonesnapper. My name is AJ Pickett, your sage for hire. Thanks for listening, and as always, I'll be back with more for you very soon.